Hi, this is Lindsay, and you are listening to the Contents of Characters podcast, where I talk about the contents of shows I love, character-driven stories, and the contents of one's character, where I look at people related to the media I'm talking about, either a part of it or just an influence, and try to focus on the good that is being put out into the world in whichever fashion seems appropriate at the time. I just want to offer a trigger warning before we start. This is a continuation. This is part 2 of episode 305. I never want to see Josh again. Crazy ex-girlfriend. Most of this episode is going to talk about suicide. So, if this is not something that you want to listen to right now, you should take a step back. There are suicide prevention numbers and resources in the description. And thank you for listening. The next episode, I promise you, will be lighter. I can't promise it'll be lighter, but it will not be the same. We'll be off of the suicide talk. So I just finished rewatching 305 for I don't even know, the 700th time. And I got just chills. And I think when I'm watching it to kind of pick it apart, it's very different than what I do on my first go around. It's just to be there and enjoy it and not to overthink it and just be in the moment. But I've seen this episode so many times, and it's been difficult and a conscious choice and making space for it to be able to do it. I don't know, I'm kind of taken back that I've covered in chills. And it really is just a testament to the show and their thoughtfulness. With that being said, what I would like to do, I want to start off by talking about Naomi a little bit. She really does not get the credit I think she deserves. First of all, Tova Felcher, not sure, really does such a great job of portraying a mother who is hard on her child and who takes the viewpoint of just pure survival, which I think is in part due to being a single mother and also in part to her Jewish heritage. Since I am not Jewish, I am not going to speak on that. But it has been said by Rachel and Aline, I don't think just right, it doesn't matter, but has been said that Naomi's only purpose is survival. And I have to give some great credit to Cynthia over at Bunch at Lunch, who talked about in, I think, her 11th podcast, talked about how Naomi didn't prepare Rebecca for what she needed mentally. And so you can go over there and check that out because she does a great job and really highlights some points that I'm not going to get into because I kind of take a different stance on this one. So I feel like Naomi cannot really give her those tools, mainly because I feel like Naomi is pretty damaged, and so I feel like Naomi is stuck in a fight or flight mode most of her life. I also feel like Naomi's pretty reckless and extremely insecure, as we can see whenever, I can't remember the guy's name right now, Calvin. Was it Calvin? I think it's Calvin. whenever, she wants Rebecca to hook her up with her business partner. So to me, that really kind of highlights that Naomi wants two things. One is to fill her void and feel youthful and beautiful and attractive, because that's where your worth comes in, which is why she's always pushing Rebecca to be thinner and things like that. But this is how women survive, is by being sexy and feeling sexy, which trumps her other, main goal, which is to make sure that Rebecca has the means to get whatever it is she needs. And part of that comes with prestige. So she doesn't just want Rebecca to be a lawyer or, respected in her field, but she wants her to have the kind of name and the kind of power that will keep her safe no matter what happens, that will ensure that people will make sure that she survives. So I really like Naomi, and I know a lot of people do not, but I think for me, I can see like the concept of everything you do coming from a place of love, yet not being the right thing. And I feel like that plays out great with Naomi and Rebecca and their dynamic. So when Naomi pushes Rebecca, I think that's because she takes on this sort of dual parenting role. And in 305, she gives Rebecca the shake, and Rebecca's not like completely astonished that she's doing something nice for her, but she is like, well, you've never given me food before. You've never encouraged me to eat before. And so, so we know that Naomi has, obviously she's seen what Rebecca's looking up on the internet and has decided that, I've got to do whatever I can, and she's going to drug her. But she's also, in this moment, realizing how unhelpful the things she has been doing has been. And I think that Naomi looks at Rebecca and has seen similar cycles that have resulted in, a suicidal attempt and a fire. But also, I imagine she's seen the same cycles over and over throughout Rebecca's life, because I believe this started most likely in her childhood. So, I'm just going to speak for myself here. Like, when I have been very depressed, my mother takes the approach that my mother's not a very forceful person, most of the time, but like I think I've said it already in the last podcast, but she is the kind of person that she will come in and yell and scream at me and pull the covers and just, whatever she's got to do to get me out of the bed, because in her mind, if I get out of the bed, I'm going to be okay. And it doesn't really work, but I know why she's doing it. I understand that, and thank God it's been a long time since that's happened, because it really upsets me. And it's been a long time since I've been to the place where I really need that, so that's also a great thing. Yay! I don't feel like Naomi has the skills to... I feel like Naomi knows how to take pills and get through something. I think when Naomi's talking about getting help, I think there's this idea that she can go and just get better and not have to deal with this anymore. I don't think Naomi has a grasp on the level of what this means for Rebecca. And part of that, I think, is Naomi's own lack of acknowledgement of her own struggles and how her own insecurities feed into her daughter's insecurities, and have shaped her to be who she is. Anyhow, I think Naomi's great. So, something they did really wonderful in this show is when Rebecca confronts Naomi, she says about drugging her, she says that that Naomi had given her hope. And Rebecca says, "You made me think you loved me. You gave me hope when I had none. And now that hope is gone." And then Naomi says, I do love you. I was just trying to help you. And Rebecca says, help? You were never any help. Well, if we go to the scene where Rebecca is asking for help, it is an exact flip on that dialogue. Rebecca looks up at the help sign and she sees help. She looks and she sees the girl who, the stewardess or flight attendant, who had asked her if she could help her. And then she looks back up and she sees the sign of hope. And she hits the button and the girl comes over and says, is everything okay? And she says, I need help. So I think the way the show framed these two scenes really shows, Rebecca doesn't feel comfortable reaching out to Naomi. Like, she had nowhere else to go, and so she also had nowhere else to go when she was on the plane, or at least she felt like she didn't. And so this is a sense of, this is part of the hopelessness, and her feeling trapped. And so when she reaches out to the flight attendant, she does so in a way that is the reverse of what was happening with Naomi, which I think is telling of Rebecca doesn't want to agree with Naomi, even when Naomi might be right. That's not to say that Naomi's right all the time or anything like that, but they have such a combative relationship that it really wasn't just on Naomi's part that they were getting along so well, but it was also on Rebecca really needing hope and looking for hope. And when she was cornered or trapped on the plane, she really felt like she was out of options. And so the hopelessness led to her taking the pills, and then once she gave in to that hopelessness, she fortunately was able to see that the option was to ask for help. And I think for Rebecca, this was really a great thing that, sort of like a tell me I'm okay, Patrick moment, and she had somebody to reach out to that made her feel safe. And so I thought this was really beautifully done. If you watch it again, just look for it. I think there is just a great mirror quality in the two scenes. So then the other thing I want to talk about Naomi is, guess what? We're going back to the opening number because that's my jam. Is how now Tova is not in the opening number. Tova, who plays Naomi, is not in the opening number, but the song Where's Rebecca Bunch plays out all throughout this series. And also there's a part in this song that kind of really hit me. They said a scandal has rocked the town of West Covina. And when we're listening to it, we're really thinking about the wedding, and, everybody's down for the gossip. But I think there's a deeper tonal meaning here where we're really talking about where is Rebecca Bunch and who is Rebecca Bunch. And so when Naomi can't find her, she's, where are you, Rebecca Nora Bunch? By the way, if anybody knows where Nora came from in her name, I would love to know. I'd just love to know. So, for some reason, I feel like it's a nod to Nora Ephron. I don't think that's true. But anyway, that's in my head. In my nogs. I miss so many great opportunities to do puns and callbacks and shit. So, I'm sorry. Thank you for listening, though. Appreciate it. I feel like the deeper meaning of the song, which some people may have gotten because we go directly to the hotel where Rebecca is sleeping, or presumably has been sleeping for 2 weeks. is that Rebecca is isolating. And I feel like the scandal might just be, this feeling of loss, this, really it's kind of separating out Josh's guy group, and there's a lot of conflict within the girl group, or at least from Rebecca to the girl group. And so I feel like this is just kind of a deeper meaning of, Rebecca doesn't know who she is. Rebecca is isolating. Rebecca feels lost. Therefore, no one knows where Rebecca is, and no one can see her when she's there. And so there's this constant, looking for her. And so I thought that the callback that Naomi did in this scene was explicitly related to the opening sequence, and really, gave this sense and ties Naomi to her friends and her loved ones in a way that it's easy to miss with Naomi. There's definitely other scenes when California Christmas Time, right before that song, where Naomi gives Rebecca some softness and humanity, and helps Rebecca understand where she's coming from. So that's the main part I have about Naomi. Only 15 minutes, no big deal. The other thing I want to talk about, and I've talked about in other podcasts, so if you're just picking up here, you'll get the gist. It's not that heavy of an analysis, but I got really concerned in 302 when Rebecca goes into Josh's church. Rebecca goes to visit the Holy Ghost himself and gives her wonderful Rose's Turn rendition. Is that Rebecca seemed so washed out, just so terribly washed out. And so I was like, and I kept looking, and I'm like, well, she has makeup on. And there's been so many times that she hasn't had makeup on. And it bothered me because I thought this was her rock bottom, and therefore she should have no makeup on, no nail polish, like another podcast had pointed out. She did. It was very light and very natural. And so I kind of came to this conclusion that this is like a very honest version of Rebecca. And I think that still holds up. But what I see in 305 is, and I think I've already seen 306. I'm not going to give any spoilers. But I think in both episodes, you can see her makeup is not there. And I think that tells us that Rebecca is at her lowest, and because she is trying to escape her reality and find peace, and as she says, she just wants to make the pain stop. And that is a spoiler, so I am sorry, but it's pretty relevant. So I just kudos to Rachel Bloom, because I know she takes a lot of care and a lot of work with her, I don't know if it's stylists or what they're called on set, but she takes a lot of care in making sure that her appearance is evocative of what Rebecca's going through. And I loved it. The last half of this podcast is going to focus on suicide in other media compared to this episode. First, I'm going to read you a list of warning signs for folks who may be suicidal. I think education on this is really helpful. I'm sure we all want to pretend that it could never happen to us or someone we love. But I'm going to go through these and also kind of have a little bit of acknowledgement of how the show showed so many of these signs. I'm going to kind of do it a little weird, I think. What it says, the warning signs of suicide: the more of these signs a person shows, the greater the risk. Warning signs are associated with suicide, but may not be what causes a suicide. Talking about wanting to die. There's not a ton of, off the top of my head, there's not a ton of Rebecca explicitly saying this, but the show has talked about death so much this season. from, wanting to kill Lolo to the death drop. I know there's a couple other mentions too. Looking for ways to kill oneself, which Rebecca does in, Naomi finds her computer. Talking about feeling hopeless or having no purpose. There's been from episode 1, like, Rebecca's been extremely sensitive. Like, she wanted her purpose to be, to mail poop to Josh, as something that would be satisfying for her. And just the slightest bit of criticism, broke her down and shut her down. So, I feel like she just didn't know how to move forward. And she even says that in 304, where she tells Josh, I don't know who I am without you. And she talks about feeling trapped or in unbearable pain. I think that pretty much every scene with her illustrates this in a subtle way. She talks about being a burden to others. I feel like this is one of the first times we see her feeling guilty over interactions with Paula, or not wanting to railroad Paula when she's talking about the case. And even in her note, she's trying to comfort her mother, and with as much as she can. Then it says, increasing the use of alcohol or drugs, which, we have her resenting her mother for giving her pills, and then, taking them, because on them she did feel better. And then, of course, she overdoes it. But also we see her going to the bar. She's not a real drinker, we know that. And she's ordering the only drink she knows, which I'll talk about. Go on a Greg rampage. Acting anxious, agitated, or recklessly. We've seen that for a while now. Sleeping too little or too much. Back to the scene at the beginning of the episode where, she's been in a hotel, but up until a certain point in the hotel, she didn't start watching movies or dyeing her hair or painting. There was a good portion of that where she was just doing a lot of sleeping, much like she was at her mother's. That doesn't make for good TV to watch her sleep a whole bunch, I imagine. But she really did. By the way, if anybody at Bunchkins is listening, or anybody that just wants to make a GIF, I would love to have a GIF of the sun rising on her face. Maybe it's not the most appropriate GIF to share, but I would like it. It would make me feel good. It just caught me in a way that illustrated something I hadn't really seen. The passage of time and the emotion of that passage of time in such a great way. Showing rage or seeking revenge. Well, that one's just self-explanatory. And displaying extreme mood swings. I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory too. Where we go, oh my goodness. 304 is all about mood swings, really. But all of the, this is something that she's really been doing, and I think is also one of the symptoms of her diagnosis, which I won't talk about on this podcast, but on this episode. But so, also on this site, there's a list of safe portrayals of suicide. There's also a list, there's more than one list out there, I'm sure, but there's also a list on health.gov, and I'm going to read it because it's a little bit more succinct. So this is what, this is really about reporting suicide, but I also think that shows should take some credence. Is that the word? Credence? Caution? I don't know. Of this list, which is to avoid inadvertently glorifying suicide, which I think this show does very well. Include reliable information on where to get help. Also, I don't always watch on the app, but this last rewatch I did, and every time I see the suicide prevention screen afterwards, I think that might be part of what gives me the chills is they go in and they say, if you are struggling, there is help and there is hope. And it just gets me. It just really gets me. And then, of course, they link to the suicide prevention hotline. Don't report detailed descriptions of suicide methods. Avoid repetition or placing the story on the front page. And the word suicide in the headline. All of this is done in the show, and Rachel Bloom had mentioned that, they tried to give as much trigger warning as they could, and without spoiling anything, and also the title, I Never Want to See Josh Again, which honestly is just painful. It's just so painful to know, to associate with that feeling. To avoid photographs or dramatic visuals, which this show does really well, and also I kind of like it leaves this not in a cliffhanger, but in a state of hope and anxiety. So that, in the week between this show and the next, there was a lot of how did she get help? How did she get help? What did they do on the plane? And none of that stuff is particularly answered. But there's just a lot of speculation and, needing to know she is okay, which she is. If you're listening to this and you haven't seen 306 yet, she is okay. Also, I feel like you knew that, but you feel that way, right? And then it also mentions to be aware that people who are grieving someone who has committed suicide is at higher risk. And I don't really feel like that is shown at all in media, and I could be wrong, so if there's an example, send it my way, that's great. I don't really feel like that is really shown, and since Rebecca didn't die, I don't know that it's necessary for this show to do. Now we're going to delve into An Officer and a Gentleman, and I'm just going to kind of lay out the plot and give a sense of how this relates to Rebecca and Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. I watched the extended version, so I'm not 100% sure what was in the original release. I think that this first part might have been cut out, but I couldn't tell you. All I can tell you is this is what I know. Zach, who is the main character, his mom commits suicide by taking pills when he is a kid, and it propels him on a completely different life trajectory, which I think is really important, because I think the same exact thing is going to happen with Rebecca. In fact, I feel like this is the middle of the show, right? Or the climax of the show, the climax of the entire show, not the series, but the entire show. I also think that this makes a sort of narrative sense for Naomi to have pills, which are, I described earlier, which is part of how Naomi copes. But it's the reason for choosing this film specifically has to do with episode 304, when Paula walks in and Nathaniel is carrying Rebecca, and Paula says, obviously something is going on between you two, and you're doing a officer and gentleman type thing. But now is not the time. I'm going to come back to that, okay? I'm going to come back to that, because now is not the time. It's really important. And also, obviously, I think that this movie had an influence on, or what is it? I don't know if it's an Easter egg. I feel like the definition of Easter egg is ever changing. So the other suicide in this story comes from Sid, who is Zach's best friend. And the girl he was dating had lied to him about being pregnant, which is all kinds of wrong in the show's depiction and, just everything. But Sid was an extremely codependent character. He was hung up on the loss of his brother and on being the person his family needed or wanted, which was his brother. So he just kind of embodied his brother and tried to be that version of a person, which wasn't necessarily him. So he realizes that he doesn't know who he is, and maybe Lynette is one of the people that did know who he was, because he didn't have to put on airs with her. But again, he doesn't really understand what love is. And the movie kind of gives this message that the lack of understanding love on this level, or knowing your needs, is what causes a person to give up. Specifically, it feels to me, even though there are a series of cascading events, Sid's not that well of a developed character. It's a plot point that gets us to really bring Zach and Deborah Wanger, is it Deborah Wanger? Is that how you say Wanger? Who plays Paula, which is confusing when we're talking about Paula in this too. Paula Proctor. Which is a plot device to get them together. So, Zach as an adult doesn't really, he's a womanizer, but we're also meant to see him as like a good guy, not like a typical womanizer, because it illustrates his dad, who never acted as a dad, sleeping around with women, and that being the culture he was brought up in. To him, it's just kind of a way of life, but he also somehow manages to be quote-unquote respectable, or is supposed to be perceived as that way, because it doesn't show a lot of him sleeping around. Also, no shame in sleeping around, do you? Not here to judge. It's just talking about the way this movie is portraying what's right and what's wrong from a love interest. Well, a typical romantic story. I kind of want to call it a rom-com, but it's not. And so Zach is reluctant to let Paula / Deborah in, but him and Sid meet at this boot camp, and then you have Paula and Lynette, who are working in a mill, and a lot they just basically see this as a way for women to get out, is to date people in the boot camp, and then they'll get to move to wherever they get the soldiers get stationed next. There's a typical point in the 10th week where the men stop dating the girls from the mill, and everybody knows this, because this is the point where they've got their confidence back and they don't need a woman to support them up, and blah, blah, fucking blah. So then Zach gets his gumption up and realizes that his true family is Paula. He does this through grieving the loss of Sid in a very barbaric way with Sergeant Foley. They have like a big karate, boxing, takedown, drag out, and this is how Zach processes his grief. I don't think that's going to come into the show, but I don't know. I feel like there is things here, and it might come back up. After that scene, he's grieving, and he graduates, and then he realizes that Paula is his family, and the only person he's ever truly let in, and completely worth his time, or what have you. And that's where we get this iconic scene, or what we know when we think of the movie, which is also the one that Nathaniel and Rebecca recreate, and Paula says, but now is not the time. And for the movie, it works because in this moment, Zach lets go of this lone wolf idea, and he embraces Paula, and I guess maybe her honesty and her vulnerability, and admits to himself that he needs people, which I think is also going to be a pretty important thing for Rebecca. I don't know that that's necessarily ties in, but I think that's a pretty common theme in life. And so I think for Nathaniel, he has to give over his feelings to Rebecca without shame or bravado, which in that particular scene he's doing. And I think he's struggling with knocking down his ego. We'll see how Nathaniel continues to develop as the season goes on, but I think he's just really struggling to not be that arrogant 10, white, rich 10, getting loans approved and whatnot. But he was being as sincere as he could, and putting his heart out there on the line to Rebecca right before he picked her up. So I had mentioned before that Paula and Lynette were working in the mill, and they see the potential pilots as being a ticket out of town. And I also think that this is really important because in this moment, Rebecca's feeling very trapped, and she's looking for a ticket out of town. And that ticket out of town happens to be Nathaniel, who has a jet. I don't think the similarities are whatever. I don't even know. I'm fucking awesome and stuff. But Rebecca is not willing to be vulnerable with Nathaniel, or really anyone at this point. So I think, she's looking for a lot of approval from the outside, and it's not allowing her to see her worth and the good that is in her. But I think that Rebecca is frantic and panicked, and she is looking for a ticket out. And so she literally, she says, "Oh, you have a jet?" And he's like, "Yeah, I have a jet." And so, let's jump in my jet and go. Rebecca feels cornered and lost and out of options in this moment. So she's latching on to Nathaniel without actually receiving him. And so I think when Paula says, but now is not the time, she's really saying, yeah, this story, this narrative that you are telling yourself isn't going to work. And I see it, and I get it, and those missing pieces and the things that I had in myself, built up this denial of what was going on and not willing to see the truth in front of me. I see it now, and you can't run off with Nathaniel. We love you, and we want you to get help. An Officer and Gentleman is a very romanticized use of suicide as this thing that can bring people together, and I don't know, it's a very poor portrayal of why someone might commit suicide, as well as how people might react if someone they love commits suicide. Now, I'm not knocking, getting into a boxing match when you're grieving and angry. I myself, I like to go to the batting cages for those feelings. But it was really an unnecessary part of the story that sacrificed a character so two people could fall in love. and so I didn't appreciate that at all. This is 1982. It was the year I was born. That's a long-ass time ago, because I'm young, though, so nobody say anything different. It will hurt my feelings, and I might cry for days. No, I wouldn't. I know how old I am. So, anyway, so there's some of my thoughts on the movie compared with the show and why they might have chosen to pick it. The other movie I watched is What Dreams May Come. There is no reason that ties this movie to Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, other than this is a person who committed suicide, who seems to have emotional instability. That's a clinical diagnosis right there. The movie is also about situational depression caused by Annie losing her entire family within the span of 2 years. It also is it was like my favorite movie, especially when I had this philosophy that there was we all had soulmates, which is the storyline is that soulmates can always find each other. For those of you who don't know, this movie is, since it's not as relevant, I won't spend very much time on it, but the basic plotline and story goes what I've just told you. Chris, which is Annie's wife, has died, as well as her 2 kids and her dog. And Annie commits suicide. And they are all of the story takes all of the story takes place in the afterlife, which is a realm where you get to create your own reality from your own thoughts. Chris paints a reality that is part of the fantastical world his wife had painted as an artist. And so there's his is literally paint. And then so people who are depressed or suicidal tend to have a different outcome when they create their own world, which I think in a way has a bit of a nice commentary on the darkness and the headspace that you might be in if you were to commit suicide. But also, I don't know, maybe it's just a harsh interpretation of hopelessness. So Annie's world is her actual house that is ruined and dark and everything, nothing works in it, and things just continue to come up missing. She just keeps losing her things. So we also have, I can't remember if Ian or Albert says this, but Ian's the son and Albert is someone that Chris looked up to. And so this is a quote from the movie. And it's a little harsh, so if you're feeling sensitive, you might want to skip ahead about 3 minutes. The quote is not that long, and just being safe. They think of suicide as a quick route to oblivion, an escape. Far from it. It merely alters a person from one form to another. Nothing can destroy the spirit. Suicide only precipitates a darker continuation of the same condition from which escape was sought. A condition under circumstances so much more painful. And then this is just I think I got this next quote from Wikipedia or something, because this was a book made into a movie. And it says, Chris, who is initially relieved that Annie's suffering is gone, grows angry when he learns that those who commit suicide go to hell. And then he goes on to say that hell is not a judgment made against them, but rather their own tendency to create a nightmare afterlife world, which is based on their pain. Chris is adamant that he will rescue Annie from hell, despite Albert, his, the guy he looks up to, insistence that no one has ever succeeded in doing so with someone who has committed suicide. So obviously there's some problem here that perpetuates the idea that one person can save another person. I feel like they need a little Heather in there for some levity to just, give them a flashlight. I feel like that's like my favorite statement. No, and people, I'm just going to start talking to, people who don't watch the show and say, well, you can't help someone that doesn't want to be helped, but swinging a flashlight around is fun, and nobody's going to know what the fuck I'm talking about, but I'm going to keep doing it because I love the show. So, this kind of goes into this false notion that hell and heaven are a mindset for us, which I think negates that Annie does have some sort of mental illness that is present in her. It alludes to it, but it doesn't explore it. In the movie, where we know that she has relied heavily on Chris to get her out of any sort of funk, I guess. Might be a more, kind of lighthearted way they might put it. And so it really kind of feeds into this notion that, love can conquer all. There is one person for everyone. This is also sort of, plays into this romanticization of suicide, and when it is, don't get me wrong, I still love the story. It's still, really heavy and very beautifully done. There's a lot to appreciate about the movie itself. So Annie has this part of her hell is not being able to realize that she has passed on and to another realm. And there's this quote, which I think is really wonderful and probably what can be said about what makes sense as far as Rebecca and Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. And it goes like this. Nothing will break her denial. It is stronger than her love. In fact, it is reinforced by her love. And I feel like that quote so much sums up what so many of these characters are going through. If you look at Daryl and, this resistance to wanting to admit that Josh doesn't want a baby, and like how difficult that's been for him. It's reinforced by like, I love him, I want this, and if he loved me, he'd want this sort of thing. And so that is this idea that denial is reinforced by love. I don't know, it really hit home with me, and I found it kind of amazing that when I just Googled like quotes and images of What Dreams May Come, this was not one of the quotes, because I feel like it's probably the most profound in the entire movie. But there's a lot of quotes about, soulmates and shit that I guess people like to deal with more than dealing with denial, because it's reinforced by their love, maybe. But, obviously this is true with Paula and Rebecca, and this is, gosh, I think this is the main point about why we really don't know Josh. Like, we know Josh avoids conflict, and we know Josh avoids responsibility, and, but we really, Josh is just not as developed of a character, and I really strongly believe that is because we've only seen him, or we've mostly seen him through Rebecca's eyes, and Rebecca has got to ignore everything about him in order to pursue what she thinks is love. And so, this love or longing for Josh is blocked and supported by her denial of, whether or not Josh can make her laugh for real. And then insert tangent about Greg, pull that out. Okay, yeah. And the last portrayal I want to talk about of suicide, I wanted it to be contemporary, but I'll be honest with you, I didn't actually watch it because I never wanted to watch it. had a lot of people suggest that I watch it, and I'm talking about 13 Reasons Why. And I've heard great things, mainly great things about it. So when I stumbled across the YouTuber Nitpics, Nitpix, and 13, I can't remember the title of his video. What an asshole. The insult of 13 Reasons Why. I had to listen to it, and in it, he does a really great job deconstructing some of these reasons, and one of them is, the lack of character development, and if you know me, that's a big deal, and maybe I could sense that there wasn't a lot of character development. I'm going to read you a quote by him from this YouTube video. He says that 13 Reasons Why focuses so much on forwarding a political and social agenda that it sacrifices having likable, tangible characters that is in line with a real, tangible world. And he goes into talking about it being romanticized and stylized in a way that really resonates with me. And I think if you're interested in this podcast, you'll definitely be interested in his videos. They're great. He's very funny and astute. I feel like there must be a team of people working on it. I can't believe it would be one dude. But anyway. And so he says that the message in 13 Reasons Why is that there's not other people there to be accountable, or that every time that Hannah, the main character, or the character who had committed suicide before the series starts, that every time she tried to reach out, no one noticed anything was going on, that other parents of other children never noticed anything was going on. And I think, I think if we go back to Crazy Ex-Girlfriend and we talk about Naomi again, full circle, and we talk about Naomi again, like, we can see how easy it is that she missed things, but also she once she realized, she made a great effort, right or wrong, she made a great effort to try to help Rebecca, as well as, once her friends realized that something was going on, they tried to have a convention intervention that didn't go over very well, but they reached out to her. And so I think, like, this idea that people don't want to help being a part of, our stories is not helpful. And so in An Officer and a Gentleman, Sid, he doesn't particularly reach out to anyone. And so that's very problematic. And one of the quotes that Zach says is, "You stupid fucking Okie, why did you do it? Why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't you even try?" And while I think that's certainly a possibility that someone might not try to reach out, it's also going back to, another part of this podcast. It's about awareness and knowing what to look for. And I don't know if I said it in this podcast, so I'll say it again, but being sympathetic and, really not making it about you in those moments is really important, because I know that it's scary. I know that it's scary to be in that situation, but, it doesn't hurt to be educated on it, because I think most people will encounter someone reaching out to them in some form or another in their lifetime, or at least I know I have on multiple occasions, so maybe I have a false sense. So in What Dreams May Come, there is this notion that, Annie couldn't reach out to anyone. She writes in her journal that her therapist is crazy and that there's only one person that can help her. And I think that is also a dangerous romanticization of suicidal ideation and depression and grief, it's hard to break through that darkness. That is so true, but it is possible, and it is possible with multiple people. If you have to find a Patrick, you can do that, like they did on This Is Us with good old Randall talking to the guy at Pretend Clothes. You've got to reach out however it is. And so there are numbers, there are texting services, and I will link several things in the description below, so you could just click on them. But, as I've said in other podcasts, feel free to reach out to me if you want to. This is a hard place to be in, and you're not alone. So many other people have felt and do feel the way you feel, and so many people have overcame that feeling, and so there is hope. There is always, always hope, and there is help. Thank you for listening to my podcast. Check out Nitpics. Check out at Bunched Lunch. Man, I fuck it up every time. Bunch at Lunch. They are both super insightful resources. As always, I am Lindsay, and you can reach me at Contents of Characters. S is on both of those, plural, not possessive, at gmail.com, on YouTube, at, that place with the bird, Twitter, that's the one, which at Twitter, it's girlykick, GIRLIEKICK. I think I'm just going to keep using my personal account, because the only thing I really want to use Twitter for is being connected in this weird, beautiful bubble of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend fans. And you can also find me on Facebook. Again, it's Contents with an S, plural not possessive, of Characters with an S, plural not possessive. Thank you for listening, and I should have my takedown of episode 306 up within a week, and hopefully I have something special in the works for you. Thanks. I am adding this piece to almost 2 or 3 weeks after I recorded this episode. I would like to dedicate this podcast to the life and the memory of a dear friend of mine who is no longer with us. He's been gone about a week as of the time I'm recording this. And he was somebody that meant a lot to me for a long time. And I often kind of joked that I didn't know him for very long, yet he impacted my life more than people I've known for a really long time, to be honest and maybe rude. I don't know. But unfortunately, he took his life a week ago. And it really has me thinking so much about the hopelessness and the darkness and the loneliness that he must have been feeling in those final moments. And my heart goes out to his family and really so many people that I have no doubt that he didn't brighten their day. I guess I'm sharing this with you because probably if you're listening to this podcast, you don't need a reminder that this is all too real, and It's not just a TV show, but it's lives. It's our lives. And so I ask you to take from this season of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, or take from this podcast, or take from your own experience, and actively try to do something to get yourself away from that headspace when you're not in that headspace. Or if you're not in that headspace and you don't have to deal with that ever or anymore, to make an effort to open up that door to other people. I will always, always, always cherish this person.